10,000 years. That is how long the story runs. From the first millet seeds pressed into yellow earth beside a slow-moving river, to a nation of 1.4 billion people whose economy reshapes the planet every single day. No other civilization on Earth can trace an unbroken thread across such an expanse of time. No other writing system, no other philosophical tradition, no other continuous cultural identity stretches from the Neolithic into the age of artificial intelligence. This is the story of China, and it is far stranger, far more violent, far more inventive, and far more resilient than any simple telling has ever captured. What follows is the complete journey. It begins 7,000 years before the Common Era, when farmers along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers domesticated grain and silk and jade, building walled towns that would become the seeds of empire. It moves through the bronze cauldrons of the Shang kings, the philosophical explosion of Confucius and Laozi, the terrifying unification under the first emperor, and the golden centuries of Han and Tang. It traces the inventions that changed the world: paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, and the commercial revolutions of the Song. It follows Mongol horsemen into Beijing, Ming treasure fleets into the Indian Ocean, and Manchu banners across the largest territory any Chinese dynasty ever held. It does not look away from catastrophe, the Opium Wars, the Taiping slaughter, the Japanese invasion, the famine of the Great Leap Forward. And it arrives finally at the extraordinary transformation of the last 4 decades. This story still matters because it is not over. The institutions, the philosophies, the patterns of unity and fracture that took shape thousands of years ago continue to drive decisions made in Beijing today. To understand the modern world, one must understand this civilization. If you enjoy complete journeys through the rise and fall of nations and empires, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where all of it began, with the river and the earth. The Yellow River descends from the Tibetan plateau in silence. For millennia before any human hand shapes its banks, the current carries vast quantities of fine-grained loess, wind-blown silt accumulated over geological ages across the plateaus of what will one day be called Gansu and Shanxi. This pale, calcium-rich earth settles across the North China Plain in deposits dozens of meters deep, creating soil of extraordinary fertility. To the south, a warmer river, the Yangtze, meanders through subtropical marshlands where wild rice grows in standing water, its grain heads heavy with starch. Between these two great waterways, separated by the Qinling mountain range, 2 distinct agricultural revolutions will unfold in parallel, each transforming scattered bands of hunter-gatherers into settled communities capable of feeding thousands. By approximately 7,000 years before the Common Era, at sites like Pailigang in modern Henan province, small communities cultivate foxtail millet on the lowest terraces above seasonal floodplains. Their stone-grinding tools, saddle querns worn smooth from decades of use, process grain into flour. Storage pits lined with fired clay hold surplus against winter. These are not nomads pausing between migrations. They are farmers, bound to specific plots of earth by the rhythm of planting and harvest. Simultaneously, far to the south, along the middle Yangtze, near Pengtushan and Kwahukiao, other communities tend paddies of cultivated rice, a domestication process stretching back perhaps 2,000 years earlier, making it among the oldest agricultural traditions on Earth. Around 5,000 years before the Common Era, the Yangshao culture emerges across the Wei River Valley and spreads eastward. Its signature is unmistakable: large ceramic vessels painted in black and dark red pigment with swirling geometric patterns, fish motifs, and human faces rendered in bold abstraction. These pots are not merely functional. They are ritual objects, placed deliberately in burials alongside polished stone axes and bone needles. Yangshao settlements like Banpo, near modern Xi'an, reveal semi-subterranean houses arranged around central plazas, their floors plastered smooth, their hearths carefully positioned. Kilns capable of reaching temperatures above 900 degrees produce ceramics of remarkable consistency. Silk fibers appear, the earliest evidence of sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms on mulberry leaves. By 3,000 years before the Common Era, a transformation accelerates. The Longshan culture replaces Yangshao across much of the Yellow River Basin. Its pottery is radically different: thin-walled, wheel-thrown, fired to a lustrous black so fine that some vessels measure barely 2 millimeters thick. But the deeper change is social. Longshan settlements are enclosed by rammed earth walls, laboriously constructed by pounding moistened loess between wooden frames, layer upon layer, until fortifications rise several meters high. These walls demand organized labor on a scale impossible without hierarchical authority. At Taosi and Shangxi, a walled enclosure of nearly 300 hectares contains palatial structures, an astronomical observatory aligned to solstices, and elite burials rich with jade and alligator skin drums beside mass graves of sacrificial victims. In the Yangtze Delta, the Liangzhu culture constructs something equally astonishing: massive hydraulic engineering projects, dams, levees, and reservoirs control water flow across low-lying plains. Their rulers are buried with hundreds of jade objects, discs symbolizing heaven, Kong tubes representing earth, and elaborate plaques carved with a deity figure wearing a feathered headdress. The jade itself comes from sources hundreds of kilometers distant, evidence of long-distance exchange networks. Around 1900 years before the Common Era, at Erlitou in the Yiluo River basin of Henan, these threads converge. A site of over 300 hectares contains palatial compounds built on rammed earth platforms, bronze casting workshops producing ritual vessels using piece mold techniques found nowhere else in the ancient world, and turquoise inlaid artifacts of extraordinary craftsmanship. Whether Erlitou represents the semi-legendary Jia dynasty remains debated, but its archaeological reality is beyond question. A stratified, centralized polity commanding specialized labor, long-distance resource extraction, and ritual authority over surrounding settlements. The foundations of a civilization are being laid in earth and bronze, awaiting the dynasty that will give them a name remembered across 4,000 years. That name arrives with the Shang. Around 1600 years before the Common Era, a polity emerges from the Central Plains with a force and coherence that surpasses anything Erlitou achieved. Its kings command armies, control bronze production on an industrial scale, and communicate with their ancestors through a writing system inscribed on animal bones and turtle shells. This is the first Chinese dynasty confirmed by both archaeological evidence and its own contemporary written records, a civilization that speaks to us directly across 35 centuries. The early Shang capital at Zhengzhou, in modern Henan, reveals the scale of ambition. A rammed earth wall nearly 7 kilometers in circumference encloses palatial foundations, bronze foundries, bone workshops, and pottery kilns. The wall itself required an estimated 10 million cubic meters of tamped earth, a labor mobilization implying tens of thousands of workers directed by centralized authority. Within and beyond these walls, bronze casting workshops produce ritual vessels using the piece mold technique developed from early Tao traditions, but now refined to astonishing sophistication. Artisans carve intricate designs into clay molds, assemble them around a core, and pour molten bronze into the negative space. The resulting vessels, ding tripods, gai food containers, Zhou wine warmers, emerge with surfaces alive with Teoti masks, spiraling thunder patterns, and zoomorphic forms of dragons and birds. Around 1300 years before the Common Era, King Pan Geng relocates the capital to Yin, near modern Anyang. Here the Shang reach their zenith. The site known as Yinshu stretches across the Yuan River's banks, encompassing royal palaces, ancestral temples, workshop districts, and vast burial grounds. The royal tombs are cruciform pits dug deep into the yellow earth, their ramps oriented to the cardinal directions. Within them lie bronze vessels of extraordinary size, the Simuwu rectangular ding, cast for a royal mother, weighs over 800 kilograms and stands nearly 1.5 meters tall. Its creation required the coordinated labor of hundreds of skilled workers and the smelting of enormous quantities of copper and tin transported from mines hundreds of kilometers distant. But it is the bones that speak most directly. Shang diviners heat cattle scapulae and turtle plastrons with bronze rods until cracks appear in the surface. These cracks are read as responses from royal ancestors and deities to questions posed by the king, questions about harvests, military campaigns, weather, childbirth, illness, and sacrifice. The diviner then inscribes the question, and sometimes the answer and its verification, directly onto the bone in a script of remarkable complexity. Over 150,000 oracle bone fragments have been recovered from Yinshu, preserving a vocabulary of roughly 4,500 distinct characters. Many remain recognizable in modern Chinese writing, an unbroken thread of literacy spanning from the late Shang to the present day. The king stands at the apex of a theocratic order. He alone mediates between the living and the ancestral spirits through divination and sacrifice. Human sacrifice accompanies royal burials and temple dedications, skeletal remains of hundreds of victims, many decapitated, fill sacrificial pits at Yinshu. Chariots with horses and drivers are buried intact. Cowrie shells from distant southern coasts serve as prestige currency. The Shang elite wage war with bronze-tipped halberds, compound bows, and horse-drawn chariots introduced from the northern steppe, fielding armies of thousands against surrounding polities. The tomb of Lady Fu Hao, a royal consort and military commander who lived around 1,200 years before the Common Era, survives unlooted. Its contents illuminate the wealth concentrated at the Shang court: nearly 200 bronze vessels, over 700 jade objects, bone hairpins, ivory cups inlaid with turquoise, and 16 human sacrificial victims. Fu Hao herself led military campaigns of 13,000 troops, according to oracle bone inscriptions bearing her name. Beyond the royal center, a network of subordinate settlements extends across the North China Plain and into the Middle Yangtze. Regional bronze casting traditions at Sanxingdui in Sichuan and Xingan in Jiangxi reveal that Shang cultural influence radiates far beyond direct political control, inspiring local elites to produce their own extraordinary bronze works. The Shang world is not a modern territorial state, but a ritual political core whose power diminishes with distance, held together by kinship networks, tribute obligations, and the prestige of bronze and oracle. For nearly 5 centuries, the Shang kings divine, sacrifice, cast, and conquer. Their scribes record the names of 30 kings across 17 generations. Their bronze vessels carry dedications to ancestors whose spirits demand constant attention. And in the characters scratched into heated bone, a civilization commits its questions to permanence, creating the oldest substantial body of Chinese writing, the ancestor of every brushstroke that will follow. But the Shang world does not endure unchallenged. To the west, in the Wei River Valley, where the waters descend from the Qinling Mountains through fertile Loess terraces, a subordinate people called the Zhou have been growing in strength for generations. They are agriculturalists and warriors, bound by kinship ties to the Shang court, yet increasingly autonomous. Their leaders serve as wardens of the western frontier, defending against Shang raiders while quietly consolidating alliances with disaffected Shang vassals. By the mid-11th century before the Common Era, the Zhou lord known posthumously as King Yuan has assembled a coalition powerful enough to threaten the Shang heartland itself. The decisive moment comes around 1046 before the Common Era at the Battle of Muya, fought on the plains northeast of the Shang capital. King Wu, son of the deceased King Yuan, leads his forces against the last Shang king, Dixin, whose army reportedly includes conscripted slaves and war prisoners of uncertain loyalty. The Zhou chronicles record that the Shang troops turned their weapons around, refusing to fight. Dixin retreats to his palace and perishes in flames. In a single engagement, 5 centuries of Shang rule collapse. What follows is not merely a change of dynasty, but an ideological revolution. The Zhou conquerors face an immediate problem: how to justify the overthrow of a sacred kingship whose authority derived from ancestral spirits. Their answer reshapes Chinese political philosophy permanently. They articulate the concept of the mandate of heaven, Tianming, declaring that heaven grants authority to rule not through bloodline alone, but through moral fitness. A king who governs justly retains heaven's favor. A king who becomes cruel or negligent forfeits it, and heaven transfers the mandate to a worthier house. The Shang fell, the Zhou proclaim, because Dixin was dissolute and tyrannical. Heaven chose the Zhou for their virtue. This doctrine accomplishes something extraordinary. It simultaneously legitimizes rebellion against unjust rulers and demands moral accountability from those who hold power. Every subsequent dynasty in Chinese history will invoke or contend with this principle. The Zhou established twin capitals, Hao and Feng near modern Xi'an in the west, and a secondary administrative center at Luoyi near modern Luoyang, to govern the conquered eastern territories. But the vast territory they now claim cannot be administered directly from the Wei River Valley alone. The solution is Fengjian, a system of enfeoffment in which the king grants lands to relatives, allies, and meritorious generals, creating a network of semi-autonomous states bound to the Zhou royal house by blood, ritual obligation, and periodic tribute. Bronze vessels from this era bear lengthy inscriptions recording these grants, the king's words cast permanently in metal, specifying territories, populations, and duties owed. For nearly 3 centuries, the Western Zhou system holds. The king performs the great sacrifices, mediates disputes between lords, and commands military coalitions. Ritual bronze production continues on a massive scale, though the vessels grow more restrained in decoration, their inscriptions longer and more legalistic. The Zhou develop elaborate codes of propriety, LEIA, governing everything from court ceremony to mourning periods, from music to warfare. These codes become the foundation of what later thinkers will call the way of the former kings. Yet the feudal architecture contains the seeds of its own dissolution. Each generation, the bonds between the royal house and its distant vassals weaken. Local lords develop their own administrative traditions, their own military forces, their own economic bases. The peripheral states grow, while the royal domain shrinks through successive grants. In 771 before the Common Era, a coalition of rebellious vassals and Western nomadic peoples sacks the capital at Hao. King Yu perishes. His successor, King Ping, relocates the court eastward to Luoyi, inaugurating what historians call the Eastern Zhou. The move preserves the dynasty in name, but royal power has been shattered beyond recovery. The Zhou king becomes a ritual figurehead, performing the sacrifices that legitimize a political order he can no longer command. Real power now belongs to the lords. And so the age of the lords begins in earnest. For 2.5 centuries after the fall of Hao, the great states of the Central Plains wage war upon one another with escalating ferocity. Jin, Chu, Qi, and Qin, each commands armies numbering in the tens of thousands, each absorbs smaller neighbors, each refines the machinery of governance and killing. But it is in the far west, in the Wei River Valley where the old Zhou heartland once stood, that the most radical transformation takes shape. The state of Qin, long dismissed by Eastern courts as semi-barbarous, occupies terrain that is both a fortress and a launching ground, shielded by mountains to the east, fed by the rich loess soils of the Guanzhong Plain. In 356 before the Common Era, a wandering legalist scholar named Shang Yang arrives at the Qin court and persuades Duke Xiao to implement reforms of extraordinary severity. The old aristocratic privileges are abolished. Rank and land are awarded solely for military achievement, heads taken in battle. The population is organized into groups of 5 and 10 households, bound by mutual surveillance and collective punishment. Agriculture and warfare become the only honored occupations. Commerce is taxed heavily. Idleness is criminalized. The law is inscribed on bamboo strips and posted publicly, its punishments calibrated with mathematical precision: mutilation, forced labor, execution. Within a generation, Qin is transformed from a middling power into the most disciplined military state the Chinese world has ever produced. The effects ripple outward across decades. Qin armies push eastward through the Hangu Pass, defeating Wei, then Han, then Zhao, in campaigns of devastating efficiency. The state builds roads, straight, wide, compacted earth highways that allow rapid troop movement across the Guanzhong Basin and beyond. Irrigation projects, most notably the Zhengguo Canal completed around 246 before the Common Era, turn arid land into productive farmland, swelling Qin's granaries and its conscript population. By 247 before the Common Era, a 13-year-old boy named Ying Zheng ascends the Qin throne. He inherits a state already dominant, already possessing the largest army, the most efficient bureaucracy, and the most ruthless strategic culture in the known world. When he reaches maturity and purges his regents, the final campaigns of conquest begin. Han falls in 230 before the Common Era, Zhao in 228, Wei in 225. Chu, the great southern power, collapses in 223 after a campaign requiring 600,000 troops. Yuan and Qi follow in 222 and 221. In a single decade, 6 ancient kingdoms are extinguished. In 221 before the Common Era, Yingzheng declares himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. The title itself is an invention, combining the words for the legendary sage emperors of antiquity into a designation that claims supremacy over all earthly and spiritual authority. He abolishes feudalism entirely. The empire is divided into 36 commanderies, each administered by appointed officials who serve at the emperor's pleasure and can be transferred or dismissed at will. No territory is hereditary. No lord holds independent military power. The standardizations follow with relentless logic. 6 rival scripts are replaced by a single writing system. Weights and measures are unified. Bronze standards are cast and distributed to every market. Axle widths are fixed so that cart ruts across the empire align. Coinage is standardized into round copper coins with square central holes. Roads radiate outward from the capital at Xianyang, their surfaces packed hard, their widths mandating the passage of imperial chariots. The empire becomes legible to its center as no polity in East Asia has been before. Yet the cost is staggering. Hundreds of thousands of conscripts labor on the northern frontier, connecting and extending older walls into continuous defensive ramparts against nomadic incursions, the earliest form of what later ages will call the Great Wall. 700,000 laborers, many of them convicts, toil on the emperor's mausoleum near modern Xi'an, where an underground army of terracotta warriors stands in silent formation, each face individually modeled, each body armored and positioned according to military rank. The Apang Palace, planned on a scale to dwarf all previous royal residences, consumes forests of timber from the southern mountains. The empire does not survive its maker. Within 4 years of the first emperor's death in 210 before the Common Era, the Qin collapses under the weight of its own severity. Peasant rebellions erupt across the eastern provinces, led by men who remember the old kingdoms. From the chaos, 2 figures emerge: Xiang Yu, an aristocratic warrior of overwhelming martial power, and Liu Bang, a minor functionary from the district of Pei in modern Jiangsu, a man of no noble birth and little formal education, but possessed of an extraordinary capacity to attract and retain talented followers. Their struggle consumes China for 4 years. When Xiang Yu falls on his own sword at the banks of the Wu River in 202 before the Common Era, Liu Bang stands alone as master of the realm. He takes the title Emperor Gaozu and establishes his capital at Chang'an, near the ruins of the Qin heartland in the Wei River Valley. The city rises on a grid plan of extraordinary precision, rammed earth walls stretching nearly 26 kilometers in circumference, enclosing palaces, markets, arsenals, and administrative offices. The Weiyang Palace alone covers an area larger than the later forbidden city of the Ming. Yet Gaozu's genius lies not in construction, but in compromise. Where the Qin imposed uniform centralization through terror, the early Han adopts a hybrid system: commanderies under direct imperial control in the west, and semi-autonomous kingdoms granted to relatives and allies in the east. This pragmatic blend of legalist administration and feudal accommodation allows the new dynasty to consolidate without provoking immediate revolt. For 7 decades, the early Han emperors govern with a light hand. Taxes are reduced, corvée labor is limited, Taoist-influenced philosophies of non-interference guide court policy under the empresses Lu and Du. The population recovers from decades of war. Granaries fill. Silk production expands across the Shandong and Sichuan workshops, producing bolts of fabric so standardized they function as currency along trade routes stretching westward beyond the empire's borders. Then, in 141 before the Common Era, a 15-year-old prince ascends the throne. Emperor Wu, the martial emperor, will reign for 54 years, longer than any Han sovereign, and his decisions will define the dynasty's character for posterity. He dismantles the remaining feudal kingdoms through a series of legal maneuvers, reducing them to powerless fiefdoms. He establishes Confucianism as the official state ideology, creating an imperial academy in 124 before the Common Era, where students study the 5 classics to qualify for government service. This is the embryo of the examination system that will shape Chinese governance for 2,000 years. Emperor Wu's ambitions extend far beyond the court. In 138 before the Common Era, he dispatches Zhang Qian westward with a diplomatic mission to forge alliances against the Xiongnu nomads who threaten the northern frontier. Zhang Qian is captured, held for a decade, escapes, and returns with intelligence about the kingdoms of Central Asia, Fergana, Bactria, Parthia. His reports open Chinese eyes to a world of horses, grapes, alfalfa, and trade routes stretching toward the Mediterranean. Within a generation, caravans laden with silk, lacquerware, and bronze mirrors traverse the corridors between the Taklamakan Desert's northern and southern rims, passing through oasis towns at Dunhuang, Lulan, Kucha, and Kashgar. This network, unnamed for centuries, later called the Silk Road, binds East Asia to the classical Mediterranean world in a web of commerce, religion, and technological exchange. The cost of empire is immense. Emperor Wu's campaigns against the Xiongnu, his conquests in Korea, Vietnam, and the southwestern frontier, his monopolies on salt and iron to fund military expenditure, all strain the treasury and the peasantry. Yet the institutional architecture endures. Confucian scholars staff a bureaucracy organized into 9 ministries. Provincial inspectors report directly to the throne. The grand historian Sima Qian, despite suffering castration for offending the emperor, completes his monumental records of the grand historian, 130 chapters inscribed on bamboo strips, covering Chinese history from the mythical Yellow Emperor to his own time, establishing the model for all subsequent dynastic histories. The Han does not fall in a single moment. It unravels across decades of plague, famine, eunuch conspiracy, and regional militarization until by 220 of the Common Era, the last puppet emperor abdicates and 3 rival kingdoms divide the corpse of empire. Wei holds the north from Luoyang. Shu claims the Sichuan basin from Chengdu. Wu commands the middle and lower Yangtze from Jianye. For 60 years, these states wage campaigns of extraordinary brutality across landscapes still scarred by the Yellow Turban devastation. Populations collapse. The census of the late Han recorded nearly 60 million souls. By the time the Jin dynasty reunifies the realm in 280, fewer than 16 million can be counted. That reunification proves catastrophic in its own right. The Sima clan, having usurped Wei's throne to establish the Western Jin, distributes military commands among princes of the blood, a fatal echo of Zhou feudalism without its stabilizing rituals. Between 291 and 306, 8 princes wage civil war against one another in the War of the Eight Princes, burning granaries, massacring garrisons, and inviting steppe auxiliaries into the heartland as mercenaries. The Xiongnu chieftain Liu Yuan, claiming descent from Han princesses married into his lineage, declares an independent state in 304. By 311, his forces sack Luoyang. The emperor is captured, paraded in humiliation, and eventually executed. In 316, Chang'an falls as well. The north, cradle of Chinese civilization for 4,000 years, passes into the hands of non-Han peoples. What follows is 3 centuries of partition. The Yangtze becomes a civilizational frontier. In the south, remnants of the Jin court establish themselves at Jiankang, modern Nanjing, where a succession of 4 short-lived dynasties, Eastern Jin, Liu Song, Southern Qi, and Liang, maintain Chinese literary culture, aristocratic privilege, and Confucian ritual amid constant palace coups. Great estates spread across the subtropical lowlands. Rice paddies push into the hills of modern Zhejiang, Fujian, and Henan, transforming the demographic balance of Chinese civilization permanently southward. The calligrapher Wang Shiji, active in the mid-4th century, produces his preface to the Orchid Pavilion gathering in fluid-running script, a work that will define the aesthetic ideal of Chinese brushwork for 15 centuries. In the north, 16 kingdoms rise and fall in bewildering succession. Xiongnu, Jie, Di, Qiang, and Xianbei warlords establish states that blend steppe military organization with Chinese administrative practice. The most enduring of these successor regimes is the Northern Wei, founded by the Jianbei Tuoba clan in 386. From their capital at Pingcheng, later relocated to Luoyang in 494, the Northern Wei rulers undertake a deliberate program of Sinicization, adopting Chinese surnames, court dress, language, and Confucian ritual. Yet their most spectacular legacy is Buddhist. Buddhism had trickled into China along Silk Road trade routes since the 1st century of the Common Era, but the Age of Division transforms it from a foreign curiosity into a mass faith. In a world of constant warfare and dynastic collapse, the Buddhist promise of transcendence beyond suffering resonates with peasant and aristocrat alike. Northern rulers patronize the faith lavishly. At Yonggang, near Pingcheng, artisans carve 53 caves into sandstone cliffs between 460 and 494, filling them with colossal Buddha figures, the largest standing over 17 meters tall, its robes flowing in parallel ridges influenced by Gandharan sculpture. At Longmen, outside the relocated capital of Luoyang, work begins in 493 on limestone grottos that will eventually contain over 100,000 Buddhist images. At Dunhuang, on the empire's western edge where the Silk Road splits around the Taklamakan, monks paint cave after cave with scenes of paradise in mineral pigments, lapis blue, malachite green, cinnabar red, that survive into the present day. The legendary arrival of Bodhidharma in the early 6th century, whether historical or mythologized, symbolizes Buddhism's complete absorption into Chinese spiritual life. Chan meditation, Pure Land devotion, and Tiantai scholasticism emerge as distinctly Chinese schools. Monasteries become economic powers, owning vast tracts of tax-exempt land. By the time the Sui dynasty reunifies north and south in 589 under Yang Jian, Buddhism has reshaped Chinese art, philosophy, architecture, and social organization as profoundly as Confucianism shaped the Han. The empire that emerges from fragmentation is not the empire that fell. It is something new, tempered by catastrophe, enriched by faith, and poised for a golden age. Yang Jian, the Duke of Sui who seized power from the last northern Zhou child emperor, understands that reunification demands more than military conquest. It demands infrastructure. Within 2 decades of founding his dynasty in 589, the Sui state mobilizes millions of conscripted laborers to connect existing waterways into a single arterial system running from Hangzhou in the south to the vicinity of modern Beijing in the north. The Grand Canal, completed in its initial form by 610 under Yang Jian's son Yang Guang, stretches over 1,700 kilometers, the longest artificial waterway in the world. Barges laden with rice from the Yangtze Delta glide northward through a sequence of locks and levees, feeding the capital at Luoyang and provisioning frontier armies. The canal does not merely transport grain. It binds the wheat-growing north to the rice-growing south into a single economic organism, creating the material foundation upon which all subsequent dynasties will depend. But the Sui exhausts itself in the building. Yang Guang's simultaneous campaigns against the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo drain the treasury and decimate the peasantry. Rebellion erupts across the empire. By 618, Li Yuan, a frontier military governor of mixed Chinese and Xianbei ancestry, marches on Chang'an and proclaims the Tang dynasty. His second son, Li Shimin, who engineered the actual seizure of power and eliminates his brothers in the Xuanwu Gate incident of 626, ascends the throne as Emperor Taizong. His reign, lasting until 649, establishes the template for Tang governance, a synthesis of Confucian civil administration, Buddhist patronage, Taoist imperial ancestry claims, and steppe military pragmatism. Chang'an under the Tang becomes the largest city on earth. Its outer walls enclose nearly 84 square kilometers in a precise grid of 108 walled residential wards and 2 enormous market districts. The population surpasses 1 million. The West Market teems with Sogdian merchants selling lapis lazuli and amber, Persian traders offering glassware and silver vessels, Arab dealers in frankincense and myrrh, Turkic horse breeders, Korean monks, Japanese scholars, and Indian astronomers. Tang tricolor glazed ceramics, Sankai ware with its distinctive amber, green, and cream drip patterns depict camels, foreign grooms, and court ladies in styles that reflect this cosmopolitan absorption. The Daming Palace complex northeast of the city, constructed beginning in 634, sprawls across 3.5 square kilometers of terraced halls, audience chambers, and garden pavilions where the emperor receives tribute missions from across Asia. The examination system, refined under Taizong and his successors, opens bureaucratic service to men of talent, regardless of aristocratic birth. Though in practice, elite families retain enormous advantages. Candidates compose poetry, interpret classics, and draft policy essays. This literary culture produces the greatest flowering of Chinese verse. Under Emperor Xuanzong, who reigns from 712 to 756, the court patronizes artists and poets during what later generations call the High Tang. Li Bai composes verses of spontaneous brilliance celebrating wine, moonlight, and wandering. Du Fu crafts densely elusive poems of social conscience and personal sorrow. Wang Wei paints landscape poetry in ink-wash minimalism. Buddhist monasteries sponsor translation projects that render Sanskrit sutras into elegant Chinese prose. The Grand Canal continues to function as the empire's circulatory system. Tax grain barges move in regulated convoys. Canal-side towns develop into commercial centers. Yangzhou, positioned at the canal's intersection with the Yangtze, grows wealthy on salt monopoly revenues and becomes a center of literary culture. The empire's reach extends from the Tarim Basin oases to the Korean peninsula, from the Mongolian steppe to northern Vietnam. Tang princesses marry Tibetan kings. Tang generals of Turkic origin command frontier armies. Buddhist pilgrims travel to India and return with scriptures. The dynasty presides over an interconnected world stretching from Nara to Baghdad, with Chang'an at its radiant center, a city where the sounds of dozens of languages fill market streets and where pagoda bells ring across tiled rooftops at dusk. But the radiant center does not hold. When the Tang collapses in 907, China fractures into a kaleidoscope of competing regimes, 5 dynasties in the north, succeeding one another in rapid, bloody succession, 10 kingdoms clinging to southern territories where commerce and agriculture continue largely undisturbed. For 53 years, warlords seize thrones and lose them within a decade. The old aristocratic order that sustained the Tang is shattered beyond repair. Military governors rule by sword rather than by classical learning. Yet in this chaos, something unexpected takes root. The southern kingdoms, particularly Wu Yue along the coast, and the southern Tang in the Yangtze Valley, nurture trade networks, printing houses, and ceramic industries that will form the economic foundation of what comes next. In 960, a general named Zhao Kuangyin, commander of the palace guard under the later Zhou dynasty, is acclaimed emperor by his own troops at Chengqiao. He wraps a yellow robe around his shoulders, the color of imperial authority, and founds the Song dynasty. But Zhao Kuangyin, who takes the reign name Taizu, has witnessed decades of military coups. His solution is revolutionary in its restraint. He invites his senior generals to a banquet and persuades them to retire to comfortable estates, exchanging military power for wealth and honor. Civilian governance replaces martial authority at the dynasty's core. The examination system, which existed in rudimentary form under the Tang, now becomes the primary pathway to political power. Tens of thousands of candidates sit for prefectural and metropolitan examinations each cycle, competing through mastery of classical texts, policy essays, and poetry. Kaifeng, the Song capital, sits at the junction of the Yellow River Plain and the northern terminus of the Grand Canal. Unlike Chang'an with its walled ward system and nightly curfews, Kaifeng evolves into an open commercial city. Night markets blaze with lantern light. Restaurants serve regional cuisines to merchants, scholars, and entertainers. The famous scroll painting, Along the River During Qingming Festival, captures this world in extraordinary detail. Rainbow-arched wooden bridges spanning the Bian Canal, packed with pedestrians and cargo carts, tea houses and wine shops lining the waterfront, boats maneuvering beneath bridge arches with their masts lowered. The population of Kaifeng exceeds 1 million. China's total population crosses 100 million for the first time in recorded history. The commercial revolution transforms daily existence. Paper money, jiaozi, first appears in Sichuan around 1024, replacing the cumbersome strings of iron coins that local merchants find impractical for large transactions. Guilds organize every trade from silk, weaving to firefighting. Coal fuels iron smelters in Hebei that produce over 100,000 tons annually, a figure Europe will not match for 7 centuries. Bisheng invents movable ceramic type around 1040, though woodblock printing remains dominant for its aesthetic qualities. The magnetic compass, refined from earlier geomantic instruments, enables Song mariners to navigate open ocean routes to Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. Gunpowder, known since the Tang as an alchemical curiosity, becomes a weapon of war. Fire arrows, explosive bombs, and early rocket-propelled devices deployed against northern enemies. Yet those northern enemies define the Song's strategic tragedy. The Khitan Liao dynasty controls the 16 prefectures north of the Yellow River, including modern Beijing. The Song never recovers this territory. In 1125, the Jurchen Jin dynasty destroys the Liao and then turns south. By 1127, Jurchen cavalry storms Kaifeng itself, capturing Emperor Huizong, the painter emperor whose exquisite brushwork adorns silk scrolls, along with 3,000 members of the imperial court. This catastrophe, remembered as the Jingkang incident, severs the dynasty in two. The southern Song establishes its capital at Lin'an, modern Hangzhou, south of the Yangtze. Here, between misty lakes and canal networks, a reduced but culturally brilliant civilization endures for another century and a half. Hangzhou becomes perhaps the wealthiest city on earth, its population swelling past 1 million, its markets trading porcelain from Jingdezhen, silk from Suzhou, tea from Fujian. Naval technology advances dramatically as the southern Song builds paddle-wheel warships and deploys gunpowder bombs against Jurchen River fleets. Neo-Confucian philosophy reaches its systematic apex under Zhu Xi, whose commentaries on the classical canon will define orthodox thought for 600 years. But the Mongol armies gathering beyond the northern horizon represent a force unlike any the Song has faced, patient, methodical, and ultimately irresistible. The storm arrives not from the steppe all at once, but in waves spanning decades, each more devastating than the last. In 1206, a Kuriltai on the banks of the Onon River proclaims Temujin as Chinggis Khan, universal ruler of the united Mongol tribes. Within 2 decades, his cavalry sweeps across Central Asia, shatters the Khwarezmian Empire, and turns its gaze toward the wealthy kingdoms of northern China. The Jin dynasty, already weakened by decades of war against the southern Song, faces an enemy whose mobility, discipline, and tactical genius surpass anything the steppe has previously produced. Mongol armies besiege Zhongdu, modern Beijing, and take it in 1215, forcing the Jurchen court southward to Kaifeng. The campaign grinds on for another 2 decades until 1234, when combined Mongol and Song forces finally destroy the Jin. The alliance proves catastrophic for the Song, who now share a border with the most formidable military power the world has ever seen. The conquest of southern China requires patience of a different order. The Yangtze's natural barrier, the the Song's naval superiority, and the region's dense network of fortified cities resist Mongol cavalry tactics. Mungke Khan dies during the siege of the Sichuan fortress of Diaoyu in 1259, delaying the campaign by years. His brother Kublai eventually prevails in the succession struggle and turns the empire's full resources southward. Mongol generals adopt Chinese siege technology, build massive river fleets, and systematically reduce Song strongholds along the Yangtze. Xiangyang falls after a 5-year siege in 1273, its defenders finally overwhelmed by counterweight trebuchets designed by Muslim engineers from the distant west. The southern Song court flees from Hangzhou to Fuzhou to Guangzhou and finally perishes at the naval battle of Yamen in 1279, when the last Song emperor, a child of 80, drowns with his loyal minister in the South China Sea. Kublai Khan has already proclaimed the Yuan dynasty in 1271, choosing a name from the Book of Changes signifying primal creative force. His capital, Dadu, rises on the site of the old Jin city, a planned metropolis of broad avenues, artificial lakes, and palatial compounds designed to project universal sovereignty. The summer capital of Shangdu to the north, with its marble palace surrounded by parkland, where the Khan hunts with trained cheetahs, becomes legendary in Western imagination through Marco Polo's reported descriptions. Whether the Venetian merchant truly reached China remains debated, but his account captures something essential about Yuan rule, its unprecedented scale, its fusion of steppe and sedentary traditions, its integration of China into a continental system stretching from Korea to Hungary. The Yuan administration divides its subjects into 4 hierarchical categories: Mongols at the apex, Central Asian allies second, Northern Chinese third, and former Song subjects at the bottom. The examination system is suspended for decades, reopening only in 1315 with quotas favoring non-Chinese candidates. Yet Mongol rule also brings extraordinary cultural exchange. Persian astronomers work alongside Chinese mathematicians at the Imperial Observatory. Cobalt imported from Iran transforms Chinese ceramics. Blue and white porcelain emerges at Jingdezhen, destined to become the most traded luxury commodity in human history. Drama flourishes in the Yuan Zhaju theater, freed from Confucian literary constraints. The population, however, tells a grimmer story. Census records suggest northern China's population drops by perhaps half during the conquest decades through warfare, famine, and plague. By the 1340s, the dynasty fractures. Floods devastate the Yellow River plain. Famine spreads. The government conscripts hundreds of thousands to redivert the river, and among these desperate laborers, millenarian Buddhist sects preach the coming of Maitreya. The Red Turban Rebellion erupts in 1351, engulfing central China in peasant warfare. Mongol princes fight among themselves while rebel factions compete for supremacy. From this chaos, a former Buddhist novice and beggar named Zhu Yuanzhang rises through the rebel ranks, captures Nanjing, defeats his rivals one by one, and in 1368 drives the last Yuan emperor northward beyond the Great Wall. The Mongol century in China ends, but its legacy endures in territorial conceptions, administrative practices, and trade networks that permanently alter the relationship between China and the wider world. Zhu Yuanzhang ascends the dragon throne in Nanjing in 1368, taking the reign name Hongwu, vast military power. He is the only founder of a major Chinese dynasty to have risen from absolute destitution. orphaned by famine at 16, tonsured as a Buddhist novice to survive, reduced to begging across Anhui province before joining the Red Turban rebels, his path to empire passes through every layer of suffering the Yuan collapse inflicted upon the common people. This origin shapes everything that follows. The Ming dynasty he establishes will be defined by an almost paranoid determination to impose order upon chaos, to root out corruption, and to restore what Hongwu perceives as authentic Chinese governance after a century of Mongol rule. The new emperor abolishes the position of chancellor entirely after 1380, concentrating all executive authority in his own hands. He creates the embroidered uniform guard, a secret police force answering directly to the throne, empowered to arrest, interrogate, and execute officials without normal judicial process. Purges sweep through the bureaucracy. The Hu Weiyong case of 1380 and the Lan Yu case of 1393 together claim tens of thousands of lives. Yet simultaneously, Hongwu rebuilds the examination system with extraordinary rigor, opening paths to office for talented commoners across the empire. He codifies law in the Da Ming Lu, mandates village self-governance through the Ligia system grouping households into units of 110, and orders a comprehensive land survey that registers over 850 million mu of cultivated land. Nanjing serves as the first Ming capital, its massive city walls, the longest urban fortification in the world, encircling palaces, government offices, and a population approaching 1 million. But the dynasty's geographic center shifts northward under the third emperor, Yongle, who seizes the throne from his nephew in 1402 after a brutal civil war. By 1406, construction begins on a new imperial complex in Beijing, the Forbidden City. 14 years of labor by over 1 million workers produces a palace compound of 9,999 rooms, its timber frame halls raised on white marble terraces, roofed in glazed yellow tiles, their eaves supported by intricate dugong bracket sets painted in vermilion, green, and gold. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, completed in 1420, stands as the largest wooden structure in the empire, its interior dominated by a gilded dragon throne beneath a coffered ceiling of coiling serpents. Yongle's ambitions extend far beyond architecture. Between 1405 and 1433, the Admiral Zheng He commands 7 maritime expeditions carrying fleets of treasure ships, the largest vessels measuring over 100 meters in length, across the South China Sea, through the Strait of Malacca to Calicut, Hormuz, Aden, and the coast of East Africa. These voyages project Ming prestige across the Indian Ocean, establishing tributary relationships with dozens of polities and returning with giraffes, gemstones, and ambassadors. Yet after 1433, the expeditions cease. The court turns inward, prioritizing defense against renewed Mongol threats along the northern frontier. That frontier demands monumental investment. The Great Wall as it exists in modern memory, stone-faced, brick-capped, punctuated by watchtowers at regular intervals, is largely a Ming creation, rebuilt and extended across 15,000 kilometers from the Yalu River to the deserts of Gansu. Garrison soldiers farm adjacent lands, maintaining a permanent military presence that absorbs enormous resources. Meanwhile, the single-whip tax reform of the 1570s under Grand Secretary Zhang Zhuzheng simplifies dozens of labor and grain levies into a single silver payment, acknowledging the monetization of an economy now deeply integrated into global silver flows arriving from Spanish mines in the Americas via Manila. By 1600, the population surpasses 200 million. Jingdezhen kilns fire millions of pieces of blue and white porcelain for export across Asia and Europe. Novels like Journey to the West and The Plum in the Golden Vase circulate in printed editions. But the 17th century brings cascading disaster, a little ice age cooling that shortens growing seasons, devastating famines across the northwest, plague outbreaks, and fiscal collapse as silver imports decline. Peasant rebellions multiply. In 1644, the rebel leader Li Zicheng breaches Beijing's walls. The last Ming emperor hangs himself on Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City. Within weeks, Manchu armies pour through the passes, invited by a desperate Ming general, and a new dynasty claims the mandate of heaven. The Manchu horsemen who ride south through Shanhai Pass in 1644 are not barbarian raiders, but the disciplined vanguard of a state already decades in the making. The Aisin-Gioro clan has spent a generation forging the banner system, 8 military administrative divisions, each identified by colored flags that organize Manchu, Mongol, and even surrendered Han Chinese soldiers into a unified conquest machine. Their leader, the young Shunji emperor, is only 6 years old. Real power rests with the regent Dogon, who understands that holding China requires more than cavalry charges. Within months of entering Beijing, Qing administrators adopt Ming institutions wholesale, the 6 ministries, the censorate, the examination system. They keep the Forbidden City as their palace, its vermilion walls now guarded by bannermen in Manchu armor. But one decree signals the new order's alien origins with unmistakable force. Every Han Chinese male must shave his forehead and wear the Manchu Q hairstyle on pain of death. Resistance to this order costs tens of thousands of lives across the Yangtze Delta. Pacification takes 4 decades. Ming loyalist regimes cling to the south. The Prince of Gui flees through Yunnan into Burma before his capture and execution in 1662. The maritime loyalist Zheng Chenggong seizes Taiwan from the Dutch in 1661, and his descendants hold the island until 1683. Only under the Kangxi Emperor, who assumes personal rule in 1667 at age 13, does the dynasty achieve genuine stability. Kangxi reigns for 61 years, the longest reign in Chinese imperial history. He suppresses the revolt of the 3 feudatories, powerful Chinese generals who had helped conquer the south and now rebel against central control, in a grinding 8-year war ending in 1681. He incorporates Taiwan. He campaigns personally against the Dzunga Mongols on the Central Asian steppe. He negotiates the Treaty of Nershinsk with Russia in 1689, the first formal agreement between China and a European power, fixing borders along the Amur River. The Kangxi Yongzheng Qianlong succession spans 134 years of extraordinary imperial power. The Yongzheng Emperor, reigning from 1722 to 1735, reforms taxation, centralizes provincial governance, and establishes the Grand Council as the empire's supreme decision-making body. His son Qianlong presides over territorial expansion that brings the empire to its greatest extent, 18 million square kilometers encompassing Tibet, Xinjiang, Mongolia, Manchuria, Taiwan, and tributary relationships stretching from Korea to Vietnam. The population explodes from roughly 150 million in 1700 to over 300 million by 1800, fueled by New World crops, maize, sweet potatoes, peanuts, that colonize marginal hillside land. Yet beneath this grandeur, structural weaknesses accumulate. The literary inquisition under Qianlong terrorizes scholars for perceived anti-Manchu sentiment in their writings. Corruption metastasizes during the emperor's final decades, embodied by the notorious official Hessian who amasses a personal fortune rivaling the state treasury. When Qianlong abdicates in 1795, the dynasty's fiscal and military capacities have already begun their long erosion. The White Lotus Rebellion of 1796 to 1804 reveals that banner armies can no longer suppress internal revolt without enormous cost. Then the outside world intrudes with devastating force. British merchants, desperate to reverse a trade deficit caused by insatiable European demand for tea, silk, and porcelain, flood China with Indian opium. When the Qing court dispatches Commissioner Lin Zexu to Canton to destroy opium stocks in 1839, Britain responds with gunboats. The First Opium War exposes the technological chasm. Iron-hulled steamships demolish wooden war junks. Armstrong guns outrange Chinese cannon by 1,000 meters. The Treaty of Nanjing in 1842 cedes Hong Kong, opens 5 treaty ports, and imposes indemnities that drain the treasury. The Second Opium War brings Anglo-French troops to Beijing itself in 1860, where they loot and burn the old Summer Palace, its European-designed marble fountains and Chinese garden pavilions reduced to charred ruins that stand as monuments to humiliation. Simultaneously, the Taiping Rebellion erupts in 1850 under Hong Xiuquan, a failed examination candidate who believes himself the brother of Jesus Christ. His Taiping Heavenly Kingdom captures Nanjing in 1853 and holds it for 11 years. The death toll reaches 20 to 30 million dalu, the bloodiest civil war in human history. Regional Chinese generals like Zheng Guofan raise new armies to crush the Taiping, but their power permanently weakens central authority. The self-strengthening movement attempts industrial modernization. The 100 Days Reform of 1898 proposes constitutional monarchy. Both fail. The Boxer Uprising of 1900 invites 8-nation intervention. Finally, on the 12th of February 1912, the child emperor Puyi abdicates. 2,000 years of imperial rule end with a single edict. The republic that replaces 2 millennia of imperial rule is born fragile. Sun Yat-sen, the revolutionary who spent more years in exile than in China, serves as provisional president for barely 6 weeks before yielding power to Yuan Shikai, the former Qing general whose command of the Beiyang army makes him the only man capable of holding the fractured state together. Yuan governs from Beijing, and by 1915 he attempts to restore monarchy with himself as emperor. The backlash is immediate. Southern provinces declare independence, his own officers withdraw support, and Yuan dies in 1916, humiliated. His death shatters the last pretense of central authority. China dissolves into warlordism. For more than a decade, regional militarists carve the country into fiefdoms. In Manchuria, Zhang Zuolin commands from his railway empire. In the northwest, the Muslim Ma clique holds sway. Guangdong, Sichuan, Yunnan, each province answers to its own strongman. Meanwhile, Shanghai rises as a treaty port metropolis where Art Deco towers line the Bund, jazz floats from foreign concession dance halls, and Chinese intellectuals absorb Western ideas with desperate urgency. The May 4th movement of 1919 erupts when news arrives that the Versailles Treaty has transferred German concessions in Shandong to Japan rather than returning them to China. Students in Beijing march, workers in Shanghai strike, and a generation rejects Confucian tradition in favor of science, democracy, and revolution. Two parties emerge from this ferment. Sun Yat-sen's Nationalist Party reorganizes with Soviet advisors, building a party army at the Whampoa Military Academy near Guangzhou. The Chinese Communist Party, founded in Shanghai in 1921 with barely 50 members, grows within labor unions and peasant associations. The two cooperate until 1927, when Chiang Kai-shek, Sun's military successor, turns on the communists in the Shanghai Massacre of April, slaughtering thousands. The nationalists establish their capital at Nanjing. The communists retreat to rural base areas. Mao Zedong, a Hunanese organizer who grasps that China's revolution must be peasant-based, builds a Soviet in the mountains of Jiangxi. By 1934, nationalist encirclement campaigns force the communists into the Long March, a grueling 8,000-mile retreat across rivers, snow mountains, and grasslands that kills 90% of the 100,000 who begin it. The survivors reach Yan'an in Shanxi province in 1935, and Mao consolidates leadership of the party. Japan's full-scale invasion begins in July 1937. By December, Japanese forces capture Nanjing and perpetrate weeks of mass killing, rape, and destruction, an atrocity whose death toll reaches hundreds of thousands. Chiang moves his capital to Chongqing in Sichuan, where the wartime government endures years of aerial bombardment. The communists wage guerrilla war behind Japanese lines, expanding their territory and membership. When Japan surrenders in August 1945, civil war resumes almost immediately. By 1949, communist armies have swept the nationalists from the mainland. Chiang retreats to Taiwan. On the 1st of October 1949, Mao Zedong stands atop Tiananmen Gate in Beijing and proclaims the People's Republic. Land reform redistributes holdings from landlords to peasants, violently, with millions of class enemies executed in village tribunals. The Korean War of 1950 to 1953 costs hundreds of thousands of Chinese lives, but establishes the new state's military credibility. Then comes the Great Leap Forward of 1958, Mao's attempt to vault China into industrial modernity through collectivized agriculture and backyard steel furnaces. The result is catastrophe. Harvests collapse, grain is confiscated to meet impossible quotas, and between 1959 and 1961, famine kills an estimated 30 to 45 million people in the worst man-made disaster in recorded history. Mao retreats from daily governance, but plots return. In 1966, he launches the Cultural Revolution, mobilizing millions of young Red Guards to attack the party bureaucracy, intellectuals, and all remnants of traditional culture. Temples are smashed, books burned, teachers beaten, officials humiliated. The chaos consumes a decade, destroying careers, families, and irreplaceable cultural heritage. Only Mao's death on the 9th of September 1976 ends the upheaval, leaving a nation exhausted, impoverished, and searching for a path forward from the wreckage. The nation that emerges from Mao's death is hollowed out. Industrial output stagnates, agricultural yields barely sustain a population approaching 1 billion, and an entire generation has lost a decade of education. Yet within the Communist Party, a survivor endures. Deng Xiaoping, twice purged during the Cultural Revolution, returns to power by 1978. At the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee in December of that year, he launches what becomes known as reform and opening up, a pragmatic dismantling of collective farming, a cautious invitation to foreign capital, and a philosophical pivot captured in his famous formulation that it does not matter whether a cat is black or white so long as it catches mice. The transformation begins in the countryside. The household responsibility system replaces the commune, allowing peasant families to farm contracted land and sell surplus at market prices. Within 5 years, grain production surges. Along the southeastern coast, 4 special economic zones open in 1982: Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen, offering tax incentives and relaxed regulations to foreign investors. Shenzhen, a fishing village of 30,000 in 1979, begins its metamorphosis into a manufacturing colossus. Factories rise from rice paddies. Container ships crowd new deep-water ports. The Pearl River Delta becomes the workshop of the world. But economic liberalization does not bring political reform. In the spring of 1989, students and workers gather in Tiananmen Square demanding democratic accountability and an end to corruption. By June, over 1 million people fill Beijing's streets. On the night of June 3rd and into the 4th, the People's Liberation Army clears the square by force. The death toll remains officially suppressed. Estimates range from hundreds to thousands. The party survives, choosing a path of economic openness within authoritarian control that defines China's trajectory for the next 3 decades. Growth accelerates through the 1990s. Deng's southern tour of 1992 reinvigorates market reforms. State-owned enterprises restructure, stock exchanges open in Shanghai and Shenzhen, and foreign direct investment floods coastal cities. On the 1st of July 1997, the Union Jack descends over Hong Kong's government house, and the red flag of the People's Republic rises, ending 156 years of British colonial rule. 2 years later, Macau returns from Portuguese administration. The century of humiliation, invoked in every schoolroom, finds symbolic closure. China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 integrates its economy fully into global supply chains. Exports explode. Gross domestic product doubles, then doubles again. By 2010, China surpasses Japan as the world's second-largest economy. High-speed rail lines stitch together a continental nation, over 40,000 kilometers of track by the early 2020s, the longest network on Earth. The Three Gorges Dam spans the Yangtze, generating power for megacities that did not exist a generation earlier. Hundreds of millions of people move from poverty into a new urban middle class, the largest such migration in human history. After 2012, Xi Jinping consolidates authority unseen since Mao's era, abolishing presidential term limits, launching anti-corruption campaigns that remove rivals and reform institutions simultaneously, and projecting power outward through the Belt and Road Initiative announced in 2013, a network of infrastructure investments spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe that consciously echoes the ancient Silk Road. China's population peaks near 1.4 billion before beginning a demographic decline that poses new challenges for the century ahead. In Beijing, the Forbidden City stands surrounded by glass towers, its vermilion walls unchanged while the skyline transforms around it. Calligraphers still grind ink on stone, their brushstrokes descending from traditions older than Rome. The Grand Canal, dredged and modernized, still carries barges north. Oracle bone characters, first carved more than 3,000 years ago, remain legible to readers of modern Chinese, a continuity of written language unmatched anywhere on Earth. The civilization that began with millet farmers on the Laozi Plateau now manufactures satellites, builds quantum computers, and shapes global commerce, carrying forward institutional memories and philosophical frameworks refined across 10,000 years of unbroken cultural transmission. Thank you for joining this journey through the full arc of Chinese civilization. If these stories of deep history and human resilience have moved you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration of the forces that shaped our world.